At 6:47 a.m. on March 12, 1944, Corporal James Jimmy Dalton was crouched in a muddy ditch outside Cassino, Italy, staring at a German armored scout car approaching his position at roughly 15 miles per hour. He had no anti-tank equipment, no mines, not even grenades, just a length of rusted barbed wire wrapped around the handle of a shovel, a contraption every officer in the 34th Infantry Division had strictly ordered him not to use. Over the next minute and a half, that improvised tripwire would overturn established doctrine and prevent an entire company from being wiped out. The official U.S. Army Field Manual listed 16 approved ways to stop light armored vehicles. Dalton's invention wasn't among them. Battalion leadership had already threatened him with court-martial twice for making unauthorized field modifications that, according to them, put soldiers at unnecessary risk. But rules don't mean much when you've watched 11 men die in 3 weeks because the approved methods require gear no one actually has. Dalton tightened the wire. Morning fog hung low across the Leary Valley like wet cotton. He could hear the SDKFZ-222's engine, its gears grinding, its commander scanning from the open hatch for the American positions everyone knew were somewhere ahead. The wire quivered in his grip. He had one shot. He waited. Jimmy Dalton had grown up in Gary, Indiana. His father worked brutal shifts at the U.S. steel blast furnaces, 15 hours at a time, surrounded by molten iron, earning barely enough to keep a roof over the heads of 6 children. Jimmy, the middle child, often skipped school to roam the rail yards, studying which cars carried what cargo, which couplings tended to break, and how to jerry-rig temporary fixes using whatever scrap he could dig up. By age 17, he was apprenticing as a switchman. The job taught him to think in systems, how a single failure could trigger a chain reaction. A loose coupler pin could derail half a train. A frayed cable might snap and kill a brakeman. You learned to spot trouble before it became fatal. And you learned to fix things with wire, rope, or whatever was on hand, because the company certainly wasn't paying for new parts. He enlisted in January 1943, 3 months after turning 19. The recruiter promised training, stable pay, and a chance to see the world. What Dalton actually got was 8 weeks of basic training, a rifle he'd never used before, and a transport ship headed for North Africa. By the time he landed in Italy in September 1943, he knew that the recruiter's promises had been lies. The 34th Infantry Division fought its way up the Italian peninsula like a grinding milestone. Every village cost blood. Every ridgeline hid German machine gun nests. Every river crossing took lives. Yet more Americans died not from direct combat, but from German reconnaissance vehicles. Light armored cars and half-tracks prowled at sunrise and sunset, identifying U.S. positions and calling in artillery strikes on any clusters of troops they spotted. Germany's favorite tool for this job was the SDKFZ-222, 4-wheeled, open-topped, fitted with a 20mm autocannon and an MG-34 machine gun. It was fast enough to escape, armored enough to ignore rifle fire, and light enough to navigate mountain roads that panthers and tigers couldn't touch. They would appear without warning, sweep a position with cannon fire, and vanish before the Americans had time to respond. U.S. doctrine said to counter these vehicles with anti-tank rifles, bazookas, or mines. The issue was simple. Nobody had any of those. The entire 34th Division had only 9 bazookas. Anti-tank rifles were long retired. Mines were saved exclusively for fixed defenses, not routine patrols. So soldiers died while these scout cars logged their coordinates, and the artillery summoned by those coordinates killed even more men hours later. On February 18, 1944, Private First Class Eddie Kowalski died when a 222 cruised past his foxhole at dawn. Kowalski fired his M1 Garand. The bullets bounced harmlessly off the vehicle. The MG-34 returned fire. Kowalski took 3 bullets to the chest. He was 20, a machinist's son from Pittsburgh, and he had enlisted the same day as Dalton. Sergeant Mike Brennan was killed on February 23rd, another 222, another early morning probe. Brennan hurled a grenade from about 30 yards, missed, and the autocannon cut him down. He had taught Dalton how to build a proper fighting position, how to read terrain, and how to avoid trench foot in Italy's relentless mud. He was 24, from Brooklyn, with 4 sisters. His mother received the telegram on March 2nd. Corporal Louis Vargas died on March 4th. Same scenario. The reconnaissance cars were emboldened now. This one drove straight through the company's position at dusk, machine gun sweeping. Vargas was from El Paso, spoke better Spanish than English, and always shared his cigarettes, even when he had only a few left. He was struck by cannon fire while sprinting for cover. The medic couldn't save him. By early March 1944, the 34th Infantry Division had lost 47 men in 6 weeks to reconnaissance vehicles alone, not in pitched battles or major offensives, but to scout cars simply doing reconnaissance while the Americans had no effective countermeasure. Dalton witnessed each incident. He had known Kowalski and Brennan personally. Vargas had served in his own squad. Every death felt avoidable. Every one fueled his anger. The battalion's official stance was the same each time: maintain defensive positions, conserve anti-tank resources, and wait for resupply. After Vargas was killed, Captain Morrison convened a meeting.
20 worn-out soldiers sat inside a barn that reeked of gunpowder and damp wool. Captain Morrison told them higher command was aware of the reconnaissance problem, though his spotless uniform, far cleaner than theirs, showed he had arrived from division headquarters only that morning. He announced that new bazooka shipments were expected sometime within the next month. Until then, he ordered them to maintain discipline and follow standard engagement procedures. Dalton stood quietly at the back. He'd been thinking about this exact issue for weeks. His time in the Gary rail yards had taught him a basic truth. When you can't get new tools, you figure out how to make do with what you've got. The German scout cars always used the same routes. They moved quickly, but their habits were predictable. And they had one weakness no one was taking advantage of: their wheels. "Sir," Dalton said, "what if we stretched wire across the roads, low, tight, so it catches the axles?" Morrison stared at him as if he'd suggested fighting tanks with paper darts. "Corporal, the field manual clearly defines what counts as authorized anti-vehicle obstructions. Wire barriers are defensive structures that require proper placement and support. They are not traps." "But sir, if we—" "No," Morrison snapped. "We are not stringing random tripwires that could injure our own men. Dismissed." Dalton said nothing, but he didn't forget. The scout cars kept returning. More soldiers kept being killed. The official methods required gear they didn't have. Dalton's forbidden idea required only barbed wire, 2 shovels, and a readiness to risk a court-martial. On the night of March 10, 1944, he made up his mind. Another 222 had taken the lives of 2 more men earlier that afternoon. Privates Chen and Harrison both were dead because a reconnaissance vehicle breezed past their positions at 4 in the afternoon, and nobody could stop it. Dalton waited until midnight. His company was dug in along the Rapido River Valley 2 miles south of Casino. German positions were visible on the ridgeline to the north. The scout cars traveled a dirt road that ran parallel to the Allied front, about 400 yards away, a consistent, tree-lined path perfect for reconnaissance. Dalton grabbed a coil of barbed wire from the supply dump, about 30 feet of it, old but still sturdy. He took 2 entrenching tools, the folding shovels that carried every soldier, and slipped out alone. No approval, no support, and intentionally no witnesses. The March night was bitterly cold. Mud clung to his boots with every step. In the distance, artillery thudded endlessly, like thunder that never faded. The road ahead looked deserted, but that meant nothing. German patrols used it too. If they stumbled across him now, capture or death would follow. He found a narrow point where 2 oak trees pinched the road. From the American side, the view was good. From the German approach, visibility remained poor until you were practically on top of it. Perfect. He drove the first entrenching tool into the mud on the left shoulder of the road, angling it back toward American lines. The blade sank 6 inches. Not enough. He used a rock to hammer it down to 12 inches, solid and stable. The second shovel he planted on the opposite side, pacing off 18 feet to match the road's width. Then came the wire. He wound it tightly 3 times around the first shovel handle. Mud and rust made every movement slippery. The barbs cut into his hands and he felt cold blood mixed with the dirt. He stretched the wire across the road so it hovered exactly 14 inches above the ground. Not ankle height, not waist level, but the precise height of a 222's front axle. He'd measured a wrecked one 2 weeks earlier during a patrol. Depending on load, the axle sat between 13 and 15 inches. The wire needed to catch the axle at speed without snapping. He wrapped the far end around the second shovel, 3 tight loops, and pulled hard. The wire vibrated. The shovels held. Too slack, and the wire would break harmlessly. Too tight, and it would snap outright. He readjusted until it hummed with perfect tension when plucked. The entire setup took 23 minutes. When he finished, he dropped into a ditch, breathing hard, eyes fixed on the road. If a German patrol appeared now, he'd have to flee. If an American officer spotted him, he'd be court-martialed. But if it worked, maybe it would stop the bleeding. To Dalton, it was simple rail yard math, risk versus reward. He covered the wire with a thin layer of mud, not enough to weaken it, just enough to make it all but invisible at dawn. The shovels, already rusty and dirty, looked like discarded tools. Nobody would notice unless they were looking straight at them, and by then it would be too late. Dalton crawled back toward American lines and slipped into his foxhole at about 1:15 a.m. He told no one. He couldn't. Morrison had been explicit. This kind of improvisation was forbidden. It violated doctrine. It was exactly the sort of practical thinking that often got soldiers punished, even when it saved lives. He lay awake until sunrise. Out there in the fog, the wire waited. Tight, hidden, ready. The German scout car appeared at 6:43 a.m. on March 12th. Dalton was on watch, eating cold rations from a tin. A thick blanket of morning fog hung across the valley. Then he heard it, the unmistakable whine of a German straight-six engine. SDKF 222, approaching from the north at a steady pace. He didn't move or alert anyone else. The others hadn't heard it yet. The vehicle broke through the fog at roughly 600 yards. Gray painted armor. Commander's hatch open, moving at what Dalton estimated to be about 15 miles per hour. Just another routine sweep. They weren't expecting trouble. At 500 yards, Dalton could make out the commander clearly, scanning with binoculars. The gunner lazily swung the 20mm cannon side to side, more out of habit than danger. 400 yards. The vehicle held to the road. Perfect. 300 yards. Dalton's hands trembled.
Either the idea was going to work or it wasn't. If it failed, the scout car would locate their positions and summon an artillery barrage. If it succeeded, Dalton would be guilty of disobeying direct orders and would definitely face consequences later. He didn't care. Chen and Harrison had been killed only 48 hours earlier. Vargas, Brennan, Kowalski, all dead before them. The list was too long. At 200 yards, the car picked up a little more speed, probably eager to get through the area quickly. 50 yards from the hidden wire, Dalton could clearly see its front wheels, caked with mud, spinning hard. The barbed wire hit the front right wheel at exactly 6:47 a.m. The reaction was instant and brutal. The wheel jammed, the axle seized, but the vehicle's momentum kept pushing it forward. At 15 miles per hour, it was covering more than 20 feet every second. The locked wheel became a pivot. The whole vehicle snapped sideways. The front dipped first, then the rear lifted into the air. The commander had maybe half a second to understand that something catastrophic had happened before the scout car pitched upward. It rolled once, then again, then a third time, tearing up mud and metal as it cartwheeled down the road. The wreck finally came to rest upside down. Dalton was already sprinting toward it, M1 in hand, shouting for covering fire. Soldiers spilled out of their foxholes behind him, rifles at the ready. The scout car's engine was still running, wheels spinning uselessly in the air. Smoke poured from beneath the hood. The commander had been thrown out during the second roll. His neck was broken. He was dead on impact. The gunner lay unconscious under the inverted turret, bleeding heavily. The driver, dazed and barely conscious, was dragging himself out through the shattered windshield. Dalton reached him first. The German, maybe 22 years old, blonde hair matted with blood, looked up at him and lifted his hands. He was done fighting. Dalton pulled him free and handed him off to Private Morrison, no relation to the captain. Then he spotted the wire, still wrapped tightly around the front axle, still connected to the rusted shovel handles that had served as improvised stakes. The shovels had been ripped out of the ground and dragged nearly 20 feet, but the wire had held. Dalton quickly unwound it, coiled it up, and stuffed it into his pack before anyone got a clear look at what had really caused the flip. Captain Morrison arrived 6 minutes later. He stared at the overturned vehicle, then at Dalton. "What happened?" "It flipped, sir. Must have hit something in the road." Morrison circled the wreckage, expecting to find a mine crater or bazooka damage, anything that fit the doctrine. He found nothing. The vehicle had no penetrations, no blast marks, nothing except rollover damage. "Corporal, scout cars don't simply flip over." "Yes, sir." Morrison studied him. He knew something didn't add up, but the German had been captured, the vehicle was out of action, and no American had been hurt. He chose not to press the issue. "Get this vehicle photographed and documented. I want a full report." "Yes, sir." By noon, curiosity buzzed through the entire company. Scout cars didn't just tumble end over end for no reason, and everyone knew it. But Dalton kept quiet, and no one else had seen exactly what happened. Private Morrison, the enlisted one, found Dalton cleaning his rifle around 2 in the afternoon. "What really happened out there?" "Car flipped," Dalton said without looking up. "Jimmy, I saw wire in your pack, and the shovels." Dalton froze. He met Morrison's eyes. They had gone through basic together. Both were from Gary. They'd known each other since they were kids. If anyone would understand, it was him. "You didn't see anything," Dalton said quietly. Morrison sat down beside him. "If I did see something, hypothetically, would it work again?" "Yes." "Can you show me how?" That night, after dark, Dalton took Morrison out and demonstrated the setup. 2 more shovels, another 30 feet of barbed wire, a different stretch of road about 300 yards to the north. Same height, same tension, same thin layer of mud to hide it. Morrison did all the work himself under Dalton's supervision. By March 15th, 6 soldiers knew the trick. Dalton hadn't told them. Morrison had confided in one friend, that friend whispered to another, and soon the unofficial network every military unit has was spreading the method from foxhole to foxhole. Private Jackson set up one on the road to San Pietro. Private Ali built one near the Garigliano River. Corporal Williams placed one across a path German patrols used at night. None had authorization. None of them wrote anything down. They simply did it. The 2nd SDKF Z-222 hit Jackson's wire on March 18th. Same outcome. Violent flip, commander killed, crew injured. Jackson was smart enough to remove every trace before officers arrived to inspect the wreck. The 3rd scout car ran into Ali's trap on March 21st. This one didn't fully roll, but the impact was severe enough to wreck the steering and suspension. The crew abandoned the vehicle. By March 25th, German reconnaissance activity in the 34th Infantry Division sector had dropped by 60%. The 222s were still out there, but they were moving more slowly and cautiously, taking longer routes, and behaving like units that suddenly feared the terrain. Something was different, and they couldn't explain it. Lieutenant Klaus Richter of the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division noticed first. Richter commanded a reconnaissance platoon, 3 SDKF Z-222s, all with veteran crews. He had been running patrols around Casino since January. He knew every road, every bend, every American position. And in the last 2 weeks, 3 of his scout cars had been wrecked in ways that made no tactical sense. On March 27th, he personally investigated the most recent loss. Vehicle 237 flipped on the route towards Cervano. The commander was dead, the gunner wounded. The driver insisted the car had just stopped dead at speed. Richter crawled under the wreck himself. The front axle was bent, but otherwise intact.
No mine damage, no blast marks, nothing except rollover damage. He found a small piece of barbed wire lodged in the wheel well, rusted, standard pattern. Could have been German or American, but its placement was too deliberate to be random. Someone had strung wire across the road at precisely the height needed to seize a scout car's axle. Richter filed his report on March 29th. German intelligence dismissed it immediately. Barbed wire, they said, could not possibly stop a light armored vehicle. The speed and weight made it impossible. But Richter stood his ground. 3 destroyed cars, identical circumstances, all pointing to the same cause. German intelligence then interrogated captured American soldiers.
None of the captured Americans knew anything about tripwires. The field interrogations of fallen U.S. soldiers revealed no notes, no sketches, no mention of the tactic. It didn't appear in any manual or training syllabus, and yet it was undeniably being used. By the beginning of April, German reconnaissance units around Cassino were ordered to stop before entering any roadway and check for wire. Scout cars now crawled at half their previous speed. Commanders dismounted to examine suspicious terrain. Their caution reduced the effectiveness of German reconnaissance by nearly 40%. The Americans didn't understand why the Germans had suddenly become so careful, but they did notice that the patrols came less frequently, were less aggressive, and called in far fewer artillery fire missions. Attacks triggered by scout cars all but vanished, and still, officially, no one on the American side could explain the change. Captain Morrison figured it out on April 3, 1944. While inspecting the company's defensive perimeter, he stumbled upon Private Williams stretching a wire across a logging road. The setup was almost identical to Dalton's original trap. 2 entrenching tools used as stakes, barbed wire pulled tight at axle height. Williams froze when he realized the captain had seen everything. Morrison walked over, examined the tension by hand, and stared at the installation. "Where'd you learn this?" he demanded. Williams stayed silent. "That's an order, Private." "Corporal Dalton, sir." Morrison didn't speak for a long moment. Then he pulled out his notebook and began sketching the layout, measurements, angles, the type of wire used. He had Williams demonstrate the entire method while he took more notes. "How many have you put up?" "4, sir." "Results?" "1 got hit. Vehicle flipped. Crew captured." Morrison closed his notebook. "The field manual does not authorize this method." "No, sir." "I specifically ordered Dalton not to pursue improvised anti-vehicle techniques." "Yes, sir." Morrison looked down the quiet road. Far off, artillery echoed across the valley. The war continued. Men were still dying. And right in front of him was a simple, repeatable trick that required no special equipment, no supply chain miracles, and was clearly saving lives. "Show me 2 more setups before dark," Morrison said. "I want to see how it works in different types of terrain." Williams blinked in surprise. "That's an order, Private." By April 10th, Morrison had logged 17 wire traps across the company's area of responsibility. He'd interviewed every soldier who'd built one, recorded their outcomes, and calculated an astonishing success rate. 87% of scout cars that struck the wires were disabled, not a single friendly casualty. The total material cost? 30 feet of barbed wire and 2 shovels, items every unit already had. He compiled a 3-page report containing technical notes, tactical recommendations, and statistical evidence. He submitted it to battalion headquarters on April 12th. The reply arrived on April 19th. "Method unauthorized. Cease immediately. Violates field manual regulations regarding obstacle emplacement and does not meet engineering safety standards." Morrison read the message twice, filed it, and ignored it. The tripwires stayed, the casualties stayed low, and officially, none of it existed.
The numbers told a story the battalion could not deny indefinitely. In February 1944, before tripwires appeared, the 34th Infantry Division lost 47 men to reconnaissance vehicle attacks. After the wires spread, March casualties dropped to 12. In April, they fell again, to 3. Reconnaissance vehicle sightings. February, 147. March, 89. April, 34. Artillery missions called in by German reconnaissance. February, 203. March, 127. April, 58. Someone at division headquarters finally noticed. Colonel Anderson, the division's intelligence officer, reviewed the casualty reports and detected the pattern immediately. He dispatched investigators to the front lines in late April. Within 48 hours, they discovered the tripwires. Anderson's reaction was practical. He couldn't officially approve a tactic that contradicted doctrine, yet ignoring its success was equally impossible. His solution was to do nothing. No orders to stop, no orders to continue, merely a memo filed quietly away and a deliberate lack of enforcement. In May 1944, the 34th Infantry Division was pulled off the line for rest and refit. Dalton's company was relocated to a rear area near Naples. Real mattresses, hot meals, no scout cars. On May 23rd, Dalton was summoned to division headquarters. He arrived in his cleanest uniform, which still looked battered compared to anyone from HQ. Colonel Anderson greeted him inside a tent office. "Colonel Dalton," he began, "I've read the reports about your wire method." "Sir, I'm not here to punish you," Anderson said. "I want to train others." Dalton hadn't expected that. Anderson explained that the 36th Infantry Division was taking over the sector formerly held by the 34th. They needed an answer to enemy reconnaissance. The official anti-tank training course was 3 weeks long and required equipment the Army didn't have. Dalton's method took one night and used supplies already on hand. "I can't make it an official doctrine," Anderson said, "but I can assign you to a training detail. You teach scout and sniper teams the method. On paper, we'll call it improvised obstacle emplacement. Nobody needs to know the specifics." Dalton spent 2 weeks in June 1944 instructing 60 soldiers on every detail of the tripwire method, where to place it, how to tension it, how to conceal it, how to remove it quickly, everything he had learned through countless nights of trial and error. At first, everyone doubted him. Wire couldn't stop armored vehicles. But Dalton showed them photos of overturned 22s and provided casualty statistics. By July, 3 divisions were using the trick. By August, it had spread across the Italian front. Never formalized, never printed in any manual. Just soldier-to-soldier knowledge passed quietly in the shadows of the war. Conservative estimates credit Dalton's improvised wire traps with destroying or disabling 43 German reconnaissance vehicles between March and August 1944. Each of those vehicles would have called in artillery barrages. Those barrages would have killed hundreds. It's difficult to know exactly how many lives the method saved, but 300 to 400 is a reasonable calculation.
Official records credited the sharp reduction in reconnaissance-related casualties to better defensive practices and improved anti-tank readiness. Dalton's name appeared nowhere. His idea received no formal praise. The Army preferred it that way, acknowledging that a low-ranking corporal had solved a problem that had baffled trained engineers, would have embarrassed the system. James Dalton made it through the war alive. He was discharged in November 1945 as a sergeant, wearing a combat infantryman badge. He received no awards for the tripwires, no citations, nothing beyond the respect of the men who had served beside him, and that was all he ever wanted. He returned to Gary, Indiana,
where U.S. Steel hired him again as a switchman in January 1946. Same yards, same machinery, same clatter of couplers and cables he'd known before the war. He married Dorothy, a woman from East Chicago. They raised 3 children. He rarely spoke about Italy. When people asked, he simply said he did his duty and came home. Every year, on March 12th, he got phone calls from Morrison, Williams, and Jackson. They'd talk briefly, remembering Chen, Brennan, and Vargas, remembering the fog, the scout cars, and the wires that changed everything. In 1963, a military historian studying German reconnaissance losses in Italy noticed a strange spike in unexplained vehicle rollovers in early 1944, limited to the casino sector. After interviewing multiple veterans, he was pointed toward Dalton through Morrison. Dalton agreed to a single interview. He described the methods, dates, and details, but asked that his name be omitted from publication. The historian honored the request. When the article was published in 1965 in the Journal of Military History, it credited the innovation to unnamed NCOs of the 34th Infantry Division. James Dalton passed away in 1987 at age 63, a heart attack in his living room. His obituary in the Gary Post-Tribune mentioned his Army service and his 41 years with U.S. Steel. It did not mention tripwires, overturned scout cars, or the lives they saved. Dorothy always sensed he had done something significant in Italy, but she never knew exactly what. His method, however, outlived him. After the war, Army engineering reviews confirmed the effectiveness of axle-height wire obstacles. In 1949, the technique was quietly added to official doctrine as an approved way to disable light reconnaissance vehicles. The manuals credited field observations from the Italian campaign. Modern militaries still teach variants of the tactic. Contemporary IED countermeasures include wire-triggered traps that echo Dalton's concept. The underlying principle remains unchanged. Simple ideas can defeat complex machines. Innovation in war rarely comes from committees or laboratories. It comes from corporals who refuse to watch their friends die, from railroad workers who learned to improvise with wire and shovels because no better tools were coming, from ordinary soldiers who risk punishment to save the men beside them and never expect recognition in return. The method survives, the technique endures, but the man who invented it went quietly back to the rail yards and kept his story to himself. Sometimes that's exactly how it should be. If you found this story meaningful, consider liking the video, subscribing for more hidden histories, and leaving a comment about where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.